best leaders of the future are going to be those who can adapt to the circumstances more rapidly than potentially others. It's about trusting people to do the job. It's about measuring people on outcomes rather than making sure that you're physically present as they're doing their work. Don't just do something in an agile way that others might be doing better than you. Progress, get things done, make a difference, look at achieving, but also be mindful of the context around that. What is the impact that you're having on others? I'm a big believer in having no regrets. With work or life, not making a decision is the worst thing to do.
This is CIONET TV. My name is Hendrik Deckers. I'm here today with Mark Foulsham, who is the Chief Operating Officer at Kensington Mortgages. A very warm welcome, Mark.
Thank you very much, Hendrik, and it's a pleasure to be with you today.
Mark, you are a civil engineer. You studied at Kingston University in London, and you started your career in IT 33 years ago and worked your way up as IT manager, IT director, CIO, for companies such as Atkins, Bouygues, Macquarie Bank, Azure, and then the last couple of years you were either the CDO or CEO of companies such as Surrey Innovation, Scope, and Key Enable. And then in 2019 you joined Kensington Mortgages as the COO. So Mark, tell us a bit more about yourself. What's your background? Where do you come from? And how did you arrive in this position as COO?
Well, thanks, Hendrik. Absolutely. I started off my career as a civil engineer. My father was a civil engineer, so kind of followed in his footsteps and got that sort of feeling for sort of engineering sort of when I was fairly young. And I used to go out onto to building sites and help surveys and assess buildings and structures. As part of that sort of youthful sort of teenager exuberance before I started my university degree. I soon found though that I was more attracted to the technology side of engineering, and certainly through my 20s I then migrated from civil engineering through IT infrastructure, through IT projects into the roles that you're just talking about, IT director and CIO. And then over the last sort of 10-12 years I picked up other functions as well, very much cross-related to technology, the procurement function, and also some areas like facilities, but also operations as well, which progressively have more and more depended on technology. And I think one thing I would reflect on that throughout my career, in particular, I've been fairly restless in kind of moving from one area to another, one sector to another, and so yeah, absolutely, I've been a CEO, CDO, CIO, and really tried to keep my perspective very broad as I've been going through those routes.
Okay, we certainly talk about how you broke through the glass ceiling. At some CIOs are stuck at the CIO level and don't get to the COO or CEO level. So that's certainly an interesting topic to discuss. But before we do that, Mark, tell us a little bit more about Kensington Mortgages. What is this company all about, and what is it that it does really, really well?
Absolutely. So Kensington Mortgages is the leading UK specialist mortgage provider. We're about 500 strong, so a medium-sized business. We've got about 5 billion worth of securitized loans, and we service about 10 billion worth of services in the UK. So we really look after customers who aren't typically serviced by the high street, complex backgrounds, multiple incomes, those over 55. So we're kind of a specialist and niche provider, and we see that as a very growing market at the moment, which we can come on to a bit later on, I suspect.
Okay, so what are the drivers of change? I mean, every company, every organization, every sector is going through a lot of change lately, and of course the pandemic has been a driver for that. But that and other, what are really the root causes that you need to reinvent this organization, like every organization needs to redesign and reinvent itself?
Absolutely. So I think a key word there you mentioned, Hendrik, was about reinvention. I think a lot of organisations, all organisations really, last year had to really rethink their business model, and we were no different. It was a tough year for everybody, but we re-established ourselves in terms of an operating model. About from a technology point of view, but also really absolute focus on what the customers were needing through very turbulent times. And as we've come out of that year, our absolute focus now is growth, and we do see that the specialised loan market and the mortgage industry in the UK has become one that for us is absolutely in line with the areas that we want to address in terms of the customer's complex needs, in terms of those segments that the high street and large lending organisations aren't really set up to provide for. So our absolute focus in terms of our strategy is about growth. Of course, you can't have growth without being efficient, so we have an efficiency program as well, and we're in a highly regulated business, and those of you who know the UK financial services market will know that there's a lot of focus on financial services business at the moment from the various regulators. So there's a three-pronged approach that we're taking. Absolutely about growth. It's about ensuring that we're efficient in the way that we operate, and also making sure that we are in line with the regulations that are set out in the frameworks for us. Okay,
so these are the three drivers of change. So we need to reinvent the business, and a very important, next to technology and resources and other resources and so on, a major thing that we have to redesign, reinvent, is the way that we work. So what I wanted to discuss with you, Mark, is what's the modernization, the changing role of the workplace today in your organization? How is the workforce transforming? And how do you progress in workflow automation? So workplace, workforce, and workflow are the three things I wanted to discuss with you. So let's maybe first jump into workplace. What's the situation there? I mean, we all have been working for the last so many months, mostly from home. But how do you see this in the future? How do you see this going forward? What's in your organization, the role of the office going to be in the future?
So like a lot of organisations, absolutely, we are predominantly working from home. We still are. But we've taken the opportunity over the last particularly 6 months to really have a look at what the workplace is all about. And we actually fundamentally believe it's a place to come together for collaboration and for socialising ideas, to building teams, to developing people on a kind of one-to-one basis and a team level. It's not for sitting and having Zoom calls in. We can do that anyway. So our model in terms of the workplace is one that is a combination of having places to work, places to engage with each other, and it's also though about being flexible. So we don't mind where people work as long as they are best able to work in terms of their technology and in terms of their working practices and in terms of the structures and the teams. So the workplace as it is now has been transformed itself into an area that is more facilitating those engaging conversations and about having the right types of team meetings across the organisation.
Yeah. How do you see the evolution of the home office? Because in many cities we live on smaller and smaller apartments, smaller and smaller homes. But now all of a sudden the home has an important new function, and it needs an office or maybe needs 2 home offices. How do you look at that? Because that's potentially a challenge for some people as well, no?
So in terms of home working, there's a whole spectrum of arrangements and facilities that are available to people. And as you say, some people have the ability to work in a room that is quiet and is unobstructed, but others, might work in a noisy location or have very few facilities or lack of really strong bandwidth. So what we have to do as an organisation is to take an account of those people who might actually want to work in the office more, because of some of the restrictions that they have at home, whereas those people who may be living away from the office and have a long commute or a long journey into the office might want to spend more time at home. So when we're looking at the way in which people work, it's a matter of understanding what their home arrangements are, and it's also understanding that we can kind of complement that, augment that with the way that we're working in the office as well. One interesting fact at the moment is that we're now recruiting more broadly across the UK, whereas before we were recruiting quite locally. So we've had a lot of people that we've brought on board in the last 6 to 12 months from further regions of the UK, and we don't expect them to come into the office on a regular basis. But we're now we're now focusing on the talent and the quality of that talent rather than the proximity to the office.
Yeah, but do you think for most functions it would be possible for people to, I don't know, migrate to the south of Spain and live and work from there and never show up in the office? Is that a possibility as well?
I think that would be quite unusual. I think it's important to have the office as a kind of hub to check into and to come in on a reasonably regular basis to meet with colleagues and to have that sort of social time and that engagement time. I think being away from the office permanently is not as good as having that kind of mixed mode of working. You know, the combination of the flexibility for working from home, but also making sure that you meet face to face with colleagues at an appropriate set of intervals.
Okay, let's talk a bit more about workforce. So people, I mean, location is less important, but still they need to come into an office on a regular basis. But also creating growth in your industry, efficiency, regulations. So I can imagine also the kind of people that you need both in your IT departments and your other operations department is changing as well. How do you see the workforce of Kensington change today and in the coming years?
Well, I think first of all, having a flexible workforce, an agile workforce, is extremely important. That wasn't something that was created by the pandemic. It was exposed perhaps more and catalysed more as part of the pandemic. And when we had particular younger people joining us before the pandemic, it was very important about their work-life balance and some of the key questions that were asked in interviews was what level of flexibility do I have in my role? And I think what the pandemic has done is sort of lifted the lid on that more, and it's accelerated the progress towards having a much more sort of flexible and dynamic workforce. And also, the theory that you have to be in an office to be overseen, to be sort of looked after, and to have that sort of structure of governance around you, it's not absolutely necessary. And so, it's about trusting people to do the job. It's about measuring people on outcomes rather than making sure that you're physically present as they're doing their work. Now, I think one aspect that I always talk about is that people like me and us, we're making those decisions around how the workforce model should operate. But we're of a certain generation, if you don't mind me saying that, Hendrik, and we probably have a larger house, we might have more garden, we might have more facilities in our office. And those individuals, those colleagues of ours who are starting on their careers, who kind of really relish the engagement with other people, and actually should be benefiting from the conversations with senior managers and experienced people in the office. We have to remember that that segment of our workforce is extremely important to ensure that they're developed and they have a learning program that is potentially more office-based than the remote. So there isn't one size fits all. So it comes back to that kind of model of flexibility, both from an individual perspective, but also from a kind of corporate perspective, making sure that the workforce progression, whether that's talent management or whether it's optimizing the way in which people can create value for the organisation, that's achieved in a holistic way.
So, but that also means that leadership is changing as well, because we work more on outcomes, more agile, more collaborative. So that means a different way of managing and leading people. Because not every traditional, the financial industry is a very traditional industry, I can imagine. So What are you doing to make sure that also leadership on the different levels is up to speed and with the new ways of working?
No, for sure, absolutely. Leadership styles have to change, and trust is a big part of that. And I've always believed that you trust people to do their job. You make sure you give them the right tools and the right training, and as you say, you give them a good direction, and then you measure them on their value generation, their output, rather than kind of strictly oversee them from a physical point of view. And I think actually one of the things I have thought has been very effective in terms of breaking down hierarchical structures and the traditional, ways of working within an organisation is the fact that everybody is only one button away from a video call or an audio call, and I think that sort of availability to check in with somebody or to send them a message, I think has become much more pervasive across an organisation. So I think breaking down those hierarchical structures, working in a way that is more interconnected within the different layers of a firm, I think is really key. And for us, this is all part as well, moving to a much more agile way of working, when it's less about having those sort of business as usual structures in place, but about having teams come together in a cluster or a scrum, and actually looking at those sort of outcome measures and that creation of important assets for a business.
How far are you in Kensington in the adoption of, let's say, the agile way of working, with more organized around products and services? And with scrums and teams and DevOps and so on. How far are you in the adoption of that?
Well, I think every organisation I've worked in where we've applied Agile, I always say we're on a journey. So, and I think that's a journey about making sure that you apply Agile in a pragmatic way. So we have a phrase we call, we're agiling the agile. So it's important that, as we move forward, that we don't try and kind of impose Agile in a way that's sort of formulaic. But we are progressing well. We are using Agile for some of our most important pieces of work around growth, we constantly look at what the results we're getting from the deployment of new technology, new solutions, new functionality, new applications, and that kind of cadence of feedback, in particular to customers and brokers. We're really trying to be sharp on how effective that is. And if it is effective, that's great, we'll do more. If it's not effective, then we'll stop what we're doing and we'll pivot and we'll do something else. So I think the application of Agile practices is coming through well. And I think, though, for me, it's about just reinforcing what the impact and the improvements are for our customers and brokers as a result of that.
Okay, great. So we discussed workplace that is completely changing, workforce that is going through a big transformation. Let's talk about workflow and how I think we're really in a new phase and a new era of automation. I mean, IT has been a lot about automation, of course, but now with all the new tools that are available with RPA and software robots and artificial intelligence and so on. So what is your general view on this? What is your general view on the usage of these new robot and similar tools?
So I think it's very easy to see automation as an immediate solution to go to. So my view is that RPA automation is something that is in the toolbox of what can be deployed as a solution. I think number one, it's understanding what the business operating model is, where it's working well, and where it's not working so well or it's inefficient. Then automation is part of the solution. Often automation can be used tactically when you've got applications that may be slow to develop or require sort of elements of them being improved, where that the development might take a long period of time. So my view around automation is it's one of the tools in the toolbox to apply, and I think particularly around where you've got colleagues that are working at the front end of the business and working with customers, and what we want to try and do is minimise the non-customer periods of time and maximise the in front of customer time, so that the training and the experience of our colleagues is applied very much around the customer rather than the administration. So whether it's the front end of a process or the tail end of the process, this is where we look to apply more of the automation.
So have you already implemented software robots, and what were the first cases and the first, what's the low-hanging fruit for these kinds of applications?
Well, we've applied it in our lending operations business, and in particular, as I said, around those sort of administrative tasks that are taking up a lot of time for individuals, and where we've got a bulk of work that needs to be processed, whether that's document management related or it's tying up loose ends and populating our applications. That's where we've applied it more significantly. We have actually put in a new platform last year, so we have to be careful about balancing, automation with that new application, because, to my point earlier, it's part of the solution set. It's not a panacea for everything. So we have used it in a very kind of tactical and focused way, and we have looked at where we can then redeploy people from those sort of heavy administrative processes once we've had that automated, back onto the more customer-facing elements of their job.
Now there's different ways that you can use RPA tools and software robot tools. One is where you can really automate processes in back office and make sure that you take the robot out of the human, and that the robots do as much as possible of the repetitive tasks. But another way to look at this is to give everybody a robot, a personal robot, and so where people can develop their own automation processes, and then we talk about citizen development, and so basically empowering. There's a new wave of empowering the end user. What's your view and implementation of that?
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of parallels to be drawn with the rollout of business intelligence tools in terms of what we're talking about now, and that's certainly an area that we are looking into. We haven't deployed anything yet, but we think there is a lot of value to be drawn from moving that sort of capability to the end user, the front end user, in much the same way that business intelligence tools have developed over the last sort of 4 or 5 years. So it's definitely part of our sort of arsenal of tools again.
Okay. How about artificial intelligence and machine learning? Is that top of your agenda? Are you implementing that? Are you working with that?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of what we do is absolutely around data analytics, and the underpinning model for that does rely on machine learning and AI. One of the differentiators for us as an organisation is to really understand how the brokers, our customers are interacting with us. All the way through from sort of affordability levels, all the way through to making sure that the right product is aligned, the right terms are applied, and part of our modelling is both in terms of looking at our portfolio of loans and making sure that the right levels of credit worthiness are applied to the right segments, but also ensuring that the operational activities are guided by the data that we're analysing and processing through the techniques that you talk about. And certainly one of the things we'll probably come on to shortly is about kind of moving data and analytics to the front end of the business, so we can use it as a decision-making tool much more readily.
Yeah. Now you work in a very, like you said, a highly regulated environment. I mean, you have to prove everything and double-check everything and audits, and you have different authorities checking all the work that you do. So you can't just give, I can imagine, your people the freedom to go and do whatever they want. I mean, there needs to be checks and balances and a good governance in place of these tools as well. What's your take on that?
No, absolutely. So I think it's making sure that there's a good combination of our statutory, our regulatory governance framework, very much aligned to kind of our risk management framework as well, but also the technical governance or technical design authority, or the various gates that one would go through when you were deploying software. And one of the things I think we're really careful about is that when we're deploying changes into a production environment, that we really understand what the impact on our customers are, our brokers, and making sure that from a usability perspective and avoiding customer detriment, all these things are kind of picked up. So part of the work that we're doing on our sort of larger projects is making sure that all the dots are joined between our regulatory functions, the second line functions, but also making sure that we understand the effect on customers when we roll out new solutions. And as I said earlier, that's part of the Agile principles, that whether it's sort of a positive impact in terms of functionality, or whether it's a risk-based impact in terms of the regulatory concerns and checks and balance, we do have to make sure that we have this constant feedback loop with our customers to make sure that they are getting optimized solutions that are treating customers fairly, making sure that all the regulations that we have to adhere to are in place and checked before we deploy.
Now, you said that 3 drivers of change is growth. I mean, increasing the business, of course, that's always important. Efficiency, so optimizing, managing costs, and so on. And certainly there, automation plays a big factor as well, and regulation. How about, the FinTechs and the startups and the scale-ups? Are they a threat to your business today as well?
No, I would say they're an opportunity, Hendrik. And I think the way in which the mortgage industry is evolving, horrible term, ecosystem, but this is evolving ecosystem. And one of the reasons I joined Kensington and came into this market, but I saw some parallels to where I've worked within the past in other financial services organisations. So quite often you have fintechs being created because there's a niche demand that the larger organisations, the incumbents, aren't servicing, like the neobanks, for example, as a classic example, and they start from a piece of functionality that is being underserved in the market, and then grow out from that. Whereas the large organisations, take quite an opposite point of view and try and then sort of focus in and copy some of these things that have been undertaken by fintech. So I see startups, fintechs, and newer organisations and new entrants into the market as an opportunity. Why is that? Because I think they generate innovation. I think there are opportunities to connect into those organisations where their functionality is richer than we might have, or other organisations that we already work with. So I think it does enrich that ecosystem. It enriches what's available to a customer in terms of the products and services. So the parallel for me when I worked for eSure and GoCompare, GoCompare is one of our aggregators in the UK, and initially those aggregators were seen as new entrants that were disrupting the market and were a bit of a nuisance. But actually, our strategy was very much to engage with those aggregators and to work collaboratively with them, and ultimately that gives customers a broader choice of products. And I think the same thing goes for new fintechs. There are opportunities there to engage with them and to enrich what we can do with our products and how we can deliver those out to our customers. Okay.
Let's talk a bit about how IT and Ops is organized, and because that's your responsibility in Kensington. So what's your operating model? How do you organize IT? Do you have a separate digital department and so on? Give us a bit of the structure there.
Absolutely, and I don't usually like talking about IT. I know IT for me is just feels like a bit of an old sort of phrase, and that might not resonate well with other people. But I think in today's modern organisations, we have to look at 3 areas broadly of what used to be embedded within IT. That's the technology itself. So there's infrastructure in particular, whether that's hosting, production systems, telephony, networks, all those sort of key sort of tin and wire elements of an estate. And a lot of that now is commoditized, and a lot of that can be provided by third parties, and quite frankly can be done cheaper, better, and higher quality than internally. There's a right balance to be made, though, and for me, that part of IT, the technology side, is about service. And what I mean by that, it's about making sure that your colleagues, your customers internally, get the right type of service, right level of service, but also that the service that's provided by cloud providers and outsourced organisation is also optimized. So for me, the function inside is about balancing the quality of service that one gets internally with the level of service that one has to receive externally. And there's a different makeup to that sort of team these days, and particularly around kind of commercials and contractual arrangements, and that linking the external third parties with the internal service provision. And I think that's a kind of the foundational elements of any organisation. That tin and wire has to be correct. I think what's much more important these days, and has been for a while really, is the differentiators of the two other areas, and that's for me data, which we've talked about, and that's about kind of having the right decision-making tools and lifting data so that it becomes information that one can rely on to make the correct types of decisions, again internally, but also expose that data externally to your customers and third parties as well. And then digital as well, which for me is all about having customer focus around usability, expedience of delivering products, and giving great service to customers in terms of fit product to the right type of individual. And if we look at that sort of three elements of what I would say was the old IT functions, I think a lot of IT functions have those buried and mixed, and I think you have to operate them in three different ways. One is very much kind of traditional, data is very much kind of lifting it out sort of from kind of database management up to kind of decision making and decision support and insight. And on digital, it's about kind of getting the right solutions in place for customer. And certainly digital and data, for me, are the real differentiators now behind organisations' ability to move forward.
Interesting model, Mark. Are you heavily outsourced, or are you more insourced? What's the equilibrium there between FTEs outside, inside the organisation? And then in technology and IT.
So I think we've got a good balance. We have a major platform provider, Sopra, who provides a sort of a core platform for servicing and originations in particular. And we have a number of providers for our network infrastructure, so the telephony infrastructure. So I think we've got a good mix. We are moving more and more to the cloud now, so we are working on new cloud providers, particularly around our infrastructure. Where I would say that one has to kind of keep some internal IP and keep some good sort of internal capabilities around that digital and data. So I think the crown jewels of an organisation typically are your data assets, and we talked about analytics earlier on, and I think the way in which data can be used to make the right decisions and drive the business forward through that insight, I think that's something that you kind of outsource at your peril. Of course, the kind of the more sort of data infrastructure side of things, you can help be looked after by a third party. And certainly digital as well. I think knowing your customer, knowing how they interact with your organisation is extremely important, and getting to know that customer inherently through your own people, I think is absolutely essential.
So let's zoom a bit more into the data part, one of the three core pillars of your organisation. Can you give maybe an example of some of the cool things that you're doing in that department?
Yeah, I think there's two angles really. From an external perspective, we have a model called Vector, and Vector is all about the way in which our portfolio performs, and Vector is absolutely based on quite sophisticated sets of analytics, and one of the things that we feel is differential for us is how that information can get then deployed out into our investor community. So we have an investor portal, very much directly connected to that sort of deep model, So Vector is essentially a productionized sort of solution for providing our investor insight through great data analytics. So I talked earlier about kind of exposing data. Well, that's exposing insight into how investors can have a look at our portfolio performance, and they can help make decisions on the way in which we engage with that community going forward and work and grow with them. And then from an internal perspective, we have rolled out Power BI by Microsoft, significantly across much of the functions of Kensington, and brought those kind of tools to the front end users, so that we're now able to kind of look at information, whether it's operations, it's servicing, whether it's lending, with a much more sort of fine-tuned basis to have a look at how the pipeline of cases are flowing through our originations platform, looking at service performance and seeing what levels of resources we might want to apply in future weeks and months. So it's kind of liberating the data that we've got underpinning the organisation out to those people who can use it for next best actions and decision support that in the past was going to take a lot of time to trawl through and then produce reports and then to analyse. So, a good example that a lot of meetings that we have, in particular, around the Agile projects, we start with the analytics, we start with the data insight, and say that's what the information around our data models is telling us about the effectiveness of this piece of work and the effectiveness of these actions and this project that we're rolling out, and then we can make those informed decisions about, do we want to put this build into production in the next few weeks? Do we want to change our backlog priority? What our customers are saying about us in terms of this new functionality? Are we seeing some information that's coming through social media? Are we coming through some CSAT scores? And bringing all this sort of disparate data together to give us the right information in order to then deploy new solutions out into the market.
Okay, let's talk a bit about your role today. I mean, and also how you have evolved, because like I said in the introduction, not many CIOs grow out of the IT department. Most stay in IT, and they stay as CIO, or they take different jobs in CIO jobs in different companies. But you have grown into CEO functions, CDO functions, COO functions. What is it that drove you to do that, and what made it possible for you to do that, and some other people don't? So what's your secret for success there, Mark?
Well, I'm not sure how a secret, but I can talk about my experience and my views and how that's happened. And I think actually it's quite natural. And what I mean by that is technology is not a silo, it's not a box that one can just stay within an organisation. It might have been a long time ago, but nowadays you can't get technology right without engaging with the other parts of the organisation, and those other parts of the organisation, business can't function properly without real engagement with technology. So there are no sort of defined boundaries that one should be creating when you're looking after technology. So an example is I joined eSure as head of IT, but very swiftly I also took over responsibility for procurement. Well, why? Well, we were depending on a lot of third parties for our solutions. So there was a critical mass of those organisations that we had to engage with, sometimes at quite technical level. So that was a natural sort of conglomeration of functionality. And then financial crime I took on as well, because we were doing a lot of modelling, data modelling around financial crime, so adopted that. So I think where technology and digital and data kind of leverage the right types of solutions around the organisation, I think there's a natural cooperative and collaborative need for a CIO to engage with, and ultimately, if that can be done better by sort of owning those functions and overseeing those functions, then sometimes that does work smoothly. So I've always seen myself as somebody who pulls together solutions rather than necessarily kind of builds outwards. And I think the best innovation and the best solution for organisations are ones that are drawn from different elements of different functions and then brought together in an intelligent way. So the way in which I've evolved from that kind of more parochial IT role into COO and CDO and CEO roles is kind of not really thinking about boundaries and just saying, well, there's a solution that it's only going to be optimized if we engage with this person, engage with that function, and make sure that's brought together in a collective way. And then, if that means that you are chosen to look after those functions as well, because that's more efficient, then, so be it, and that's great, because sometimes that will work better.
And do you think that we will see more of that in the future? Do you think many CIOs are well positioned to become COOs and CEOs and so on? Because in the end, CIOs oversee a lot of the business, and they have a lot of the insights of what's going on. So if I can imagine, if they're enough business focused and also have the ambition to do so, that they're in a good position to take other roles as well, no?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there is that natural sort of progression and a natural sort of engagement that will lead to that. I think if a CIO targets another area to look after, I think that's the wrong approach, really. I mean, it's not about owning another function. It's about working together with other parts of the organisation to find the best sort of solution together. And I think that if the right kind of leadership skills are applied to that sort of model, and that you always go to where the value is being generated, not where the technology is being deployed. I think that's the way CIOs can progress, and I think on that point, it's about having the right language skills. So it's about talking EBITDA, not about sort of a stack of IT kit, and it's about talking about the impact on customers rather than the 3 nines availability, and it's about talking about business risk and business loss rather than minutes of outage. So I think having the right language and the right interpretation skills is really important. And probably a final point on this, I think good CIOs that become COOs and CDOs and COOs are also great navigators as well. They find the way through the organisation. They find where those connection points are, and they utilise those to the sort of collective benefit of the organisation. Again, moving away from any concept of silos.
So you're clearly very successful, Mark, as and grown into all these different functions. So let's talk a little bit about your management style. So what is the secret of your success there? How do you make sure that you attract the right people, that you retain them, that you make them successful? How do you do that?
One of the things I say when I join an organisation, and it sounds a bit trite, is that I always take a human-centred approach. What do I mean by that? Well, I've talked a lot, in the last few minutes about customer perspective, but it's also very much important to talk about the colleague perspective as well. I do see customers and colleagues as two sides of the same coin, and if you get those two sides correct, the value of that coin will increase. And that's just a very simple sort of model I've got in my head, that it's not about necessarily getting the right processes or right technology or having the right facilities in place, but having the right people with the right attitude and the right behaviours in place, that are willing to learn, that are willing to add value, get the point around how we can better serve our customers. I think that's really key, and that's having that laser sort of look at how an organisation treats its customers, and what is that sort of service provision, product provision that is provided to them, and how effective is that. So when I look for a team member, it's sort of getting those behaviours right. It's understanding that the best solutions are put together, and best problems are solved by engaging with other people, working as a team, and it's also about having kind of diverse opinions as well. So I'll often say, do you want my job? Because if you don't, why not? You should be. It's not about ambition, but it's about knowing more, and it's about sort of having that sort of impact through, sort of a broad perspective, as a more senior person in the organisation. Mm-hmm. And I like to have people around me who sometimes will disagree, and I haven't got a problem with that. disagree with me, because I think that also generates good debate, also generates broader ideas. So I do kind of champion that sort of diverse thinking, and diversity in all its forms as well. I think it is extremely healthy, because I think it enables you to find better, more intelligent, more innovative, and more effective solutions in an organisation.
If you look at your typical weekly agenda, where do you spend most of your time? You spend time with clients, with C-level colleagues, with your teams, with the IT teams, with the operations. I don't know where, or you all day in meetings. Where is it that? Where is your focus? I mean, in your agenda.
Well, I think to be honest, I think like a lot of people, I think we spend too many times in meetings. And so, one of the things I always try and do is say, what's the purpose of the meeting, what we're trying to get out of it, and actually can we do this in a better way? And I think actually the last year has shown that we can all work in a different way. So, I would always try and find, my time being focused on what is it we're trying to achieve. How effectively are we going to be getting to that point, and are there any barriers along the way? And I think also having, my point about diversity as well, having a kind of diverse diary, I think is important. So spending, time in meetings all day long on the same sort of subject matter, I think, creates a stale thinking attitude throughout that day. So trying actually to having a mix of activities, whether it's, engaging with, customer relations, or it's talking about, the next IT deployment, or talking to the operational team about, their effectiveness. I think having that sort of spectrum, in a given day is really important. So I think, I have a lot of different types of activities during the day. One of the things I really like, one of the highlights of my month, is meeting all new starters that come in the door. And it's amazing how that invigorates you, and just hearing about their stories and hearing about why they joined Kensington. And also, reminding that they've got an opportunity to, again, that diverse thinking point, they've got the ability to challenge the status quo and to challenge why we're doing things. So it's a mixture of set pieces and free gameplay as well. I like to have that.
Let's talk about your leadership style. Why is it that people would want to work for you? I mean, what kind of leader are you? And maybe a good way to phrase this is, what do you think the people around you say about you when you're not around, about your leadership style?
Well, I think first of all, they say that I tell extremely bad dad jokes. I think that I will tend to embarrass myself if I feel that we need to have a bit of frivolity in a meeting by recounting probably the extremely bad dad jokes. But at least that distracts them away from me telling my children those same jokes. One of the things I like to do is to be open and genuine and honest about where we are with any particular subject matter. So making sure that there is a kind of strong and frank debate within the team. I talked about diverse thinking, but also diverse opinions as well. So if you've got an opinion, let's hear it. There is no monopoly on opinions in my view. And I think when like myself, when you're looking after lots of parts of the organisation, you can't be a specialist in any of those areas. You have to rely on your people and strong teams underneath you. And if you're talking all the time over those people in meetings and discussions and ways in which you solve problems, I think it can be it can stymie their sort of ability to bring up their specialist knowledge. So having that kind of open dialogue and making sure people have time to set out their views, I think is extremely important. So I think that's a big part of my style. I also like to make sure there's a good collaboration between different teams, and having a kind of one team approach. It might be that we have to address a budget item in one of my teams, and we haven't got enough budget for that. So let's look at how we can liberate some budget from elsewhere. So let's talk together. Because at the end of the day, we work for one business. So these sorts of discussions for me are really important. So really feeling together that we are kind of one team. And that from time to time we'll have to shift our balance of support, shift our balance of thinking from one team to another, depending on what initiatives that are going on. So it's kind of balancing all that, I think, is really key. Keeping an open dialogue, making sure that people don't feel disenfranchised if you're addressing a particular subject and it might not be one that they are functionally involved in, but let's make sure we explain that to them. Because I look after, one end of the business to another, and sometimes those two areas might not automatically have a need to engage, but they will learn from each other and they will need to understand, how they operate. So one of the things that the chief exec of Kensington said to me when he brought me on board is, I need you to draw the lines, I need you to join the dots together between some of these functions. And that's what I found is it's been a really exciting and energizing part of my role is, finding out where those connections are best had. And I think, my style is very much to try and find those joining moments and those joining areas. And that's why I think openness and collaboration is absolutely key.
So you talked about being open, being honest and collaborative and so on. Let's talk. And I think that reflects probably your personality as well. So let's talk about your personality a little bit more. And the way that we do that in these leadership deep dive interviews is to use the old MBTI, the Myers-Briggs type personality. And you shared with us an ENTJ, also known as a commander. And that's somebody who's extroverted, intuitive, thinking, and has a more judging personality. And these are decisive people who love momentum and accomplishment. They gather information to construct their creative visions by rarely hesitating for long before acting on them. So quite an interesting profile. And so what I recognize in many CIOs, digital leaders, CEOs, is that many of these leaders have the J at the end. So that means that you like to take decisions, you like to create a plan, stick to the plan, and execute on the plan. Does that resonate?
It absolutely does resonate, and I think what I want to try and do is make sure that recognizing my natural style versus the need to be flexible, need to be adaptable, and when I talk about collaboration, there's no point in collaborating if I don't listen as well. Mm-hmm. So it's important that I do listen, and it's important that if I'm relying on a really great team, which I do, that they have they're feeling that they have a part to play, and that their views are taken on board, because that ENTJ is also known as the emperor as well, and I certainly don't want to be a dictator. So I think being self-aware is really important, and despite your natural disposition as a type, if you are reflective and you are aware as an individual about your natural go-to places, about maybe being over-authoritative or about being absolutely focused on getting the next thing done, then I think you can soften those up and kind of address them yourself. But it's always making sure you do check on that on a regular basis.
Yeah, I can imagine, because typically people with this profile, they are very, on the positive side, they're self-confident, they're strong-willed, but on the flip side of that, they can be very impatient, arrogant, intolerant, and I mean, they know everything better. And so how did you develop yourself in that area? Because you're more the rational, I mean, you're a civil engineer, rational, so how do you become more on the listening, develop more on your listening skills and your relationship and people skills?
I think failure and grey hair have got a lot to do with it. So we learn from our mistakes, and if I go back 20 years plus, I learned the hard way. If I was being over pushy and arrogant and overly authoritative, I often found I probably wasn't getting the best out of people and the best solutions. And it sometimes takes a failure, or it takes somebody to say you could have done better there, to learn and adapt. And I think as you go through some of those mistakes and you learn from them, I think again it's about being self-reflective and say, well, we could have done that better, I could have done that better. So what is it that we learned, and trying to then reapply that next time. Still might get it wrong again, but hopefully by the third time you've got it right. And I remember when I got interviewed by Peter Wood, who launched eShore, and he said to me, what's your appetite on risk? I said, well, I come from a civil engineering background, and if you build a nuclear power station wrong, a lot of people will die very, very quickly. So my attitude on risk is quite severe. And you mentioned engineering. Yes, I like to kind of engineer solutions, but I also like to structure the way I'm reflective. So, if I found that I'm not doing something that I think is optimal, I'll kind of unpack it, but I'll also ask people, is it working for you, my style? When I have my annual reviews with my teams, I always end those by saying, and what about me? This is a two-way conversation, and just be honest about those things. So I think, learning through mistakes, being self-reflective, I think is a good way to, adapt in terms of optimizing the skills. And we're always on that journey. By the day I retire, I'll still have a lot to learn.
Now that we're talking about mistakes, let me bring up my favorite question, Mark, and that is, you've done a lot of great things, but like you said, mistakes as well, and we all do, but we have to learn from them. So my favorite question is, what was your most brilliant failure ever? And can you talk a little bit about that, and specifically what you learned from it?
Well, I think my biggest failure ever was following my son up a tree in Boston, Central Park, and then falling out of it and breaking 4 ribs. So I guess there's a translation into business terms, and don't just do something in an agile way that others might be doing better than you if you haven't got the right body parts, shall we say, to affect that. So, but I think that I don't think I've had big failures. I think I've had sort of failures that for me are sort of small in terms of impact, but containing them to a point where they didn't grow. In eShore, we only had one sort of significant issue that I had to deal with during my whole time there, which was over a decade, and that came from relying on a third party. Number one, it came from a lack of thoroughness from an individual in that third party, but it also came from me and my team making sure that maybe there wasn't enough oversight during that piece of work to make sure that individual was properly trained and properly understood what they had to do at any given time. And it was a small error, but it grew because of the time of day and the lack of sort of thinking about what they were trying to do to resolve that. So it snowballed. And it comes back to what I said earlier on from the human perspective. Most failures aren't down to people being incompetent. Most failures are down to people not being trained enough, not being given the right sort of support mechanisms, having the right run books for the processes that they're operating in. As long as we learn from that, which we did, then I think it's important that one can kind of make sure that those issues are addressed rather than going straight to that individual and saying you made a mistake, which wasn't fair.
Let's dig a little bit deeper into who you are as a person, Mark, and let's talk a little bit about your core values. What is it that really drives you? What are the values that you shared with us that you have 3 children, they're 18 to 23. What are the values that you want to see them grow up with?
So I think one of the key things that I believe in is just being mindful, and we hear a lot about mindfulness, but I think it is about sort of understanding the context that you're working in or living in. So it's not working or living in a bubble. It's understanding and being mindful about the effect that you have on others. It's being mindful about how people can perceive the things that you do. But equally, I like to marry that with I'm kind of quite a restless person. I like to get things done. I like to see progress. It's coming back to that ENTJ thing. So and I think if you're somebody that likes to get things done, I think, being that sort of self-reflective individual as well, how do you temper that? Well, I think it's about being cognizant of what the impact that can cause on other people and other situations. So driving stuff through is great, but if you're like a bull in a china shop and there's a lot of damage and a lot of collateral damage as a result of that, is that rewarding to you? Is it rewarding to others? So I recently have done kind of quite a lot of work with social enterprises and not-for-profits, and in those sort of organisations, you have to really be mindful about the impact that you're having on particularly vulnerable people, for example. Some of the values that I hope are being instilled into my children are that kind of progress, get things done, make a difference, look at achieving, but also be mindful of the context around that, and what is the impact that you're having on others, other people, and other situations around that. And it's interesting because all my children are sort of very much sort of I think kind of moving in their careers towards things like medical careers and working with sort of social enterprises and involved with that side of the organisation. So I think there's a degree of carefulness as well as mindfulness in terms of where they're moving.
But you haven't passed on your engineering genes then to your children.
Well, no. I mean, as I said, perhaps not as robustly. I never thought I was a great civil engineer. I thought I was better at technology than engineering.
Okay.
I met my wife, whilst I was working as a civil engineer, and she was a lot better at civil engineering than I was.
Now, apart from meeting your wife, what was the best thing that ever happened in your life, Mark?
Well, I mean, I have to say it was having children. I think it's the best thing and the most terrifying thing, of course. Especially my first child. But that has to be the most important thing that happened in my life, and it gives you that perspective. And particularly as you see them grow up and you see them sort of emulating the things that you do, perhaps good and bad. So again, that kind of gives you a bit of a mirror, I think, to look at when you're behaving in a certain way or trying to sort of get things done. So I think best thing in my life, and a kind of quite an educational experience, and it continues to be an educational experience. And I think bringing up children has a lot of lessons to be transferred across to working in businesses, quite frankly.
Did you have any really bad things happen in your life, and what did you learn from these?
Yeah, well, I mean, apart from falling out of that tree in Boston, I think being honest, I think last year was a really challenging year. It was a year in which a lot of people had a lot of challenges, but I lost my mother, I lost my uncle, my daughter was diagnosed with quite a severe condition, and with the restrictions around coronavirus, it was a difficult year. So I think resilience is important to understand from oneself's perspective, and I think a lot of people had those sort of combined and layered challenges in their lives and work. Overcoming that, I think, is about think about what gives you resilience. How do you kind of ignite your superpowers around coping in those situations? And it does come back to trusted friends, trusted colleagues, and then also reaching out to, if you need help to organisations and those who can kind of make sure that you keep on track. And we're talking in the UK about mental health a lot this week. It's a big focus in the UK, Mental Health Awareness Week, and I think a lot of people found their mental health last year challenged a lot, and I felt that as well, and I think it's important that we all learn from last year, and when it comes to that mindfulness, when it comes to sort of the impact on others, and when it comes on to self-reflection, I think there's a lot of learnings that we should just not forget about from last year. We should be taking that forward.
And how do you unstressed? How do you relax? What is your way to get back to yourself? I mean, what do you do mostly in your spare time?
There's probably two things really. First of all, I like running. And one of the reasons I like running is you can just go. You don't necessarily have any complicated kit that you need to get. You just get changed and you go out and you run. And I don't run with headphones. I just run outside. It sounds a bit like Forrest Gump, doesn't it? But I'll just go and I'll use that time to just reflect and to sort of let my mind just diffuse. So I find that very invigorating, as well as an opportunity to just sort of relax. And the other thing is, I'm a piano player. I'm not a very good piano player, but I like playing piano. And I'm lucky to have a little baby grand in our house. So if the children are annoying me, I'll go and play the piano, and sometimes I might even sing. So that's also another way of relaxing.
What kind of music do you play?
Well, again, if I want to annoy children, I'll play Coldplay, of course, because for any teenager, Coldplay is the anathema of music. I think I probably could annoy them more if I tried to try and play some grime, but I wouldn't do that. So no, I mean I'm a big jazz fan, and but a frustrated jazz fan, because I love listening to jazz and I cannot play jazz. So I sort of probably get somewhere in between rock and jazz when I'm playing. But look, I'm a massive fan of Queen, after a party, you'll often find me at a piano playing Queen's greatest hits.
Oh, that's cool. We need to find an occasion to do that together, Mark. And
maybe.
we all want to be able to play like Bill Evans, don't we? So
absolutely.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the important figures in your life. Who are the people that you look up to or looked up to, and did you have any important mentors in your life, people that guided you, that you've learned from?
I've had some really good people that I've worked with and worked for, and I think when I look at learning from the styles of people I've worked around, when I was reflecting on this the other day, I don't think necessarily you have to look to a senior leader in an organisation. Often it's sometimes junior people who are performing outside their sort of domain, who are going beyond their job description, and sometimes I think actually that's more impressive than somebody who's at the top of an organisation. So there's been a few people I've worked with who are particularly junior, and I've been impressed by the way in which they kind of tackle their work and sometimes their lives. Within that context, I'm a big fan of Steve Jobs. I'm a big fan of Bill Gates. Actually, so if you can merge those two characters together, I think that would be quite an interesting character. I liked Steve Jobs' drive, and I think I liked his absolute focus on design principles. What we call human-led design now. I'm not sure what he would have called it that in his day. But just getting the design right, getting the usability right, really understanding how the product that he was creating was going to be adopted by a customer. But he also recognised, I think in the latter part of his career, that he got a lot of things wrong as well. So he kind of reflected on that. I think, for me, Bill Gates, it's sort of a huge organisation that he helped found and grow. But now, that technology and digital for good, now that he's moved with the Bill Gates Foundation, moved into, and I think that's sort of giving back on the basis of what he's created, I think is fantastic. So some of these sort of technology and digital leaders that have been icons in the last sort of 10 and 20 years, I've got a lot of time for. But I think at the other end of the scale, I think there are a lot of people that I've worked with in the past who maybe go to the unsung heroes that you can just draw some gems out from them as well.
Okay. Do you have any personal mantra, some saying, some wisdom that you want to share with us, that if you have to, I don't know, take a tough decision or something that guides you in your life as well?
Yeah, I'm a big believer in having no regrets. and I think no regrets might be a phrase that I would, call out. It's very easy to say that because again, sometimes when you're making decisions, they're not always clear about what path you want to take. But I think often with work or life, not making a decision is the worst thing to do, and to over deliberate. And I talked earlier about I'm a person who likes to see progression, likes to see movement. So my worst fear is almost the opposite to your point here, is to see stagnation and things not happening, hopefully to the better. But once I've made a decision, once I've come to a conclusion and moved forward, you can't really regret that, because that's the decision and you have to make it work. And I'm a big believer in once you have taken a route, you really try and make sure that direction that you're taking is the best one. Even on reflection, it might not have been, but you still have to push forward on that front.
So you like cream, but you don't like status quo.
Correct. Yes. Nice one. I saw what you did there, Henrik.
So, Mark, what is in your life, in your personal life, what is it that you love most, and what is it that you're afraid of, that you fear in your life?
Well, I think what I love most is about that kind of progression. And I'm a bit of a sci-fi fan as well, I must admit. And in anything to do with sci-fi, I quite enjoy. Even some of sort of the rubbish films that you often find yourselves in the middle of. Well, why is that? Because I think they're extremely creative often, and it's the art of the possible. And yes, there's a leap of faith, there's a leap of an imagination. But I love to see what people in people's minds have been created, and then kind of what if we can do this? And going back to some of the points around engineering, we talk about greenfield sites a lot in business, don't we? We start from that greenfield site. Well, literally in civil engineering, you do start with a greenfield, and you start with lots of variables that are not locked in. And you have to start making assumptions, and you have to start saying, what if that was the case? What if this was true? What if that was false? So I think there's a good correlation between my enjoyment of future potential science fiction to some degree, and that kind of what if this is possible. So that's what I love. It's about taking that leap and not just looking at the next thing, but the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. Say, well, let's have a go at that. And some would call that a kind of a moonshot approach. But if you do look forward as much as you can to that sort of real sort of potential and real opportunity that could be grabbed, then that I think gives you a really good forward momentum to get there, rather than just saying, well, what's the next step along this journey? Because that'll only get you one step, where I prefer the leap. I kind of don't like the word hate, really. I mean, I think things I dislike are ignorance in terms of understanding other people's perspectives, and we talked about diversity of thinking and diversity of society earlier a little bit, and inclusion. Those are important things for me, and I think what I dislike a lot is bigotry and ignorance around how other people work, live, and be. We've seen a lot over the last year or two, around that area about inclusion and diversity. We've all got a lot to do, and me as a white middle-aged man, in a certain sort of demographic sector, shall we say, I've had an easy life when it comes to where I am at the moment, and it's very easy for me to think that everyone else is kind of similar and have the same opportunities, and they don't. So I've got to work double hard to even just to think about what the challenges are to other people, whether it's progressing their lives or getting on the right career paths. So what I dislike is ignorance of that sort of perspective, and making sure that those sorts of things are addressed.
Okay, so Mark, to end this conversation, let's talk about the advice that you would give to young professionals that want to be as successful as you are. So people that watch these videos, they have maybe the ambition to become a CIO, a CDO, a COO, a CEO. So what's your secret ingredient? What is the advice that you would give these young professionals?
So I think particularly nowadays, being adaptable is absolutely key. So if I was starting out my career now, I think if I was talking to my younger self, I would say keep your mind open. There are things that you're going to love and there are things that you're not going to love so much, but try them, taste them, feel them, experience them, because you never know. Don't lock yourself in too soon, too early to a particular route. And if you're not enjoying that and you're not finding it fun and it doesn't energize you, change. Don't get stuck in a rut. So keep a broad mind, and learn and experience, and keep that feeling of adaptability, because the pace of change at the moment in the world is going just to increase, and what organizations are looking for in the future are people who can apply themselves in different ways to different functions, in different frames, and I think that the best employees of the future, the best leaders of the future, are going to be those who can adapt to the circumstances more rapidly than potentially others. So it's going to be a challenging world over the next few years and decades, I think. But I think the key for me would be, if I was to go back in time in my science fiction time capsule, would be to say, keep flexible, keep an open mind, and just think about being as adaptable as you can in your career route.
Okay, and with that, Mark, I would like to thank you for sharing all your insights, your experiences, your visions, and I look forward to an opportunity to meet again in London, to meet you in London, and I would call upon our CIONET UK team to organize something, an event in London, in a place where there's good piano, so that you can play something and you can sing something for us. I really look forward to that.
Thank you, it's been an absolute pleasure, and I'll start practicing soon.
Okay. See you soon, Mark. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.